Thank you, Arisa. Hello, everyone. My name is Alan Baptista. I am the product marketing manager here at Chef for Chef Compliance is my product. And I've been here a little over 2.5 years helping market the Chef Compliance and desktop solution, but now solely on Chef Compliance. I have the pleasure of having John Galvin with me today. Why don't you introduce yourself, John?
Yeah, hi, everyone. My name is John Galvin. I hail out of Portland, Oregon in the Pacific Northwest, and my history is in IT, about 20 years in IT in the design and development and deployment, as well as auditing and other functions that happen in a very large enterprise. And so I'm going to help Alan out today. We're going to talk back and forth, and I'm going to show you a demo at the end on the software that actually does the compliance.
All right, thank you. So we're going to be talking about a few different areas, more specifically on how Chef can help organizations reach, maintain, and ideally automate their PCI DSS compliance. We are gonna, these are some of the topics, kind of the journey of the story that we're gonna help you tell um, to you. And it's gonna be the first section, we're gonna be talking about how we envision organizations reaching continuous compliance. We're gonna dive a little deeper on PCI DSS for those that may not be fully aware of what that is. Just we're gonna level set some basic information. And as John mentioned, we're going to be talking about a Chef Compliance quick demo and sample codes, and then some of the next step suggestions on how you can reach a more automated way to have PCI compliance. Very well. Reaching continuous compliance. We've talked so much about compliance lately, and we've seen, this is kind of a picture that I like using because it kind of demonstrates how it feels in many ways that driving compliance and securing systems sometimes feels like you're plugging in holes in a dam, right? You're putting holes, plugging those holes, and when you plug one in, the other one bursts open and starts spewing information. So it's really, really hard to have a complete lockdown system that is productive and providing complete value, because the more you lock down, the less you may be able to see it. So ultimately, if you're trying to find compliance failures in production, in many cases, we believe that you've kind of failed as a compliance and secure organization, because you're waiting for way too long in the development and value stream cycle to really provide comprehensive compliance. You need to move that earlier in the process. So we believe that that the need for speed to deliver innovation that organizations are driving to, it may be new code, it may be new business value, it is at an all-time high, right? And with every organization trying to bring to market their applications, their business solutions, trying to bring it faster and more efficiently to market. But this speed comes at a cost. At what cost to the organization? Is it at the cost of quality, or of what is being put out there, or worse, even worse, is it at a cost of security of your systems and your environments? We believe that there's a delicate balance between the need for speed and the ability to do so in a secure and very compliant way. So
Yeah, and Alan, I want to just add here, we've seen this in the marketplace in the last month or so. There's been dramatic hits to the United States in various core areas of our economy. And some of these were based on vulnerabilities that were not patched based on the things that you're actually talking about.
yeah, and we'll get to that in terms of the known vulnerabilities, or maybe a handful or maybe a dozen of them. It's just a matter of getting to them quickly and efficiently. And how do you do that consistently across the board to your entire estate? So those are great points that you bring up, John. Um, so why is there this difficulty in balancing both speed and security? Well, we think that the need for security and compliance is and should always be non-negotiable, which in many cases causes this impediment, or the ability to deliver with speed is hindered in many ways. And why is that? Well, security reviews are done typically at the end of this long delivery process cycle where, when most slippages and delays puts that security review at the end in tremendous pressure to happen a lot faster, and really ultimately to not impede that solution innovation. You may be opening yourself up to say, yeah, we're going to just do it in a short run and not really have an in-depth security check. So you're putting yourself at risk. And how do the people do the security checks? It's through audits. And these audits usually take a lot of time, valuable, productive time for that matter, that staff could have been working on those set innovations or business values that we're trying to take. That instead of doing that, they're having to work on doing mundane audits. And really, even if we're doing it appropriately, um, the current security and compliance model offers very manual and time-consuming time-consuming process. The prevailing kind of understanding is that InfoSec, or information security policies, slow things down. A recent Gartner report highlights that there were 81% of IT professionals agree that InfoSec policies inhibit this agility and speed, and that even 77% of security professionals themselves agree that those policies slow things down. So overall, there is a perception and an understanding that these security policies, while very important, are causing some level of delay and time for the organization to produce. Do you see this being true, John, out there?
Yeah, absolutely. We see this almost in every account, where if there's audits involved, um, it's a huge time constraint. I was working with one customer in the utility space, actually, that we had to hold off any meetings for 6 months while they went through their 3-year audit. that they, every 3 years they had to do this audit in the utility space, and essentially, from our perspective, all work stopped for 6 months, and everybody is incredibly taxed and stressed, and it's just a massive effort.
Yeah, that's incredible. Um, so the current state of information security, that despite the velocity gains that other teams have um, done with their adoption of agile for development, or for the DevOps teams in general, information security teams are still somewhat lagging behind in that efficiency, in those velocity gains, right? Um, and that the continuous demand still to increase speed potentially amplify some existing issues. Like breaches take a long time to find, and exploitations occur on known vulnerabilities, um, and that remediation also takes time to complete. For instance, in the most recent kind of Verizon data breach report, I think it is of 2019, it shows that 56% of the breaches took months or longer to discover, to the earlier point that John and I were making. And that since 2014, that's more than what, 6 years now, most exploits observed, actually 90% of those exploits were used we're using only 9 known vulnerabilities. So it's not that people don't know the vulnerabilities, it's just they're having a hard time getting to them and addressing them quickly and efficiently enough. Well, we did a recent survey in 2020 where we found that most companies take about 2 months on average to complete their security or compliance audit. And that's on average. And then even though the audits are being happening, yearly, bi-yearly or quarterly basis, that even though those audits and checks are happening, 73% of those companies really see the release of vulnerabilities happening at least once a year. At least once a year, people are saying, you know what, we just don't have enough time. Let's just release it. We know there's vulnerabilities. We'll address it later on. And an important aspect of that we see is that the traditional approach is not helping. It's actually exacerbating the problem and the pain. And why is that? It's because the security checks and reviews are really waiting to the end of the process. And like we talked about, if there's any delays in development, QA, or other stages in the development process, that security review is really tightening in terms of the time that they has for development. Where you're seeing that security reviews are manual, time consuming, they involve large teams, they rely on different tools, on scanning tools that generate this too much noise and not an efficient way of translating that into productive ways of checking security. They may catch problems late in the cycle, where then it requires this closed loop process to really go back in the beginning. And as we know, there's a tenfold cost of doing improvements and movements each stage of the development cycle as you're going through. So it's very important to catch those issues earlier in the cycle, as early as possible in the cycle. And that doesn't even handle any of the managing exceptions, or how do you handle those appropriately, consistently, to where they're not becoming a cumbersome, very difficult process to complete and secure. John, any thoughts there? Do you see this out in the marketplace? How do you see customers reacting to this, last stage security review as when you're talking to them?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'll even speak from an IT perspective in my background there. Not only is this a big pain point, it's also, I would say, culturally dreaded, if I could say that, where they know that they'll have to go through these security reviews, and they'll avoid it and push it off as long as they can, or the security review process takes so incredibly long. I've even seen cases where projects have been ended because it took so long to get through the security review. It wasn't worth it by the time the 9 to 12 months that it took to get through that process. So this is an incredible amount of pain. And I would also say, from an IT perspective, it's somewhat overlooked from the resource drain that this takes. It's assumed that this must happen, which it does, but the cost to those doing the work is somewhat minimized. And what we recognize at Chef is that pain, and we're one of those key components, is how can we not only remove or at least reduce this pain and the resource drain, but make it such an integrated part of the process. And I know Alan will talk about this shortly, that it becomes almost a non-issue.
Great. Yes, thank you. And then we talked a little bit about the audits. And this is one slide that we see is very impactful in a way, that the struggle to remain compliant is kind of an interesting one. And that generally the assumed level of compliance, as you're going through on the left-hand side, you're seeing these point in time audits. The assumption is that it is very linear. It only decreases ever so slightly or increases ever so slightly, but that the assumed state of compliance is fairly leveled. But because there is constant change. There's constant addition to your systems and to your environments and to the ecosystem of your um, value, IT value that you're bringing. Um, the compliance, the check is really not so. So if you check more often, you'll see it still more difficult. But if you start checking more often, you'll probably see something that looks more like the chart on the right-hand side. To be honest, there's where you soon after you get the audit check and validation, you see immediate dips, and that's because um, there's change to the compliance system that goes out tomorrow or the next day or the week or the month following that audit review. Essentially, you're having to wait until the next audit cycle, maybe quarterly at some places, to find out that you've spent an entire quarter, in that case, in a non-compliant state. And one aspect of this reality of audits is that you're taking a subset of a system. You're not in many cases, not checking the entire estate. You're just because it's not feasible in the traditional ways of doing things to be able to check your entire estate and be doing that efficiently. Um, I think there's also a mention in the Verizon report where they've mentioned that PCI DSS compliance, where um, they believe that every year that they took a look at these companies, of all whom have passed an audit, and to do that what is called an interim audit in between those official ones, where in between those audits they do an internal assessment to see if they're ready for the next one. And what they really found is that organizations that aren't checking these elements or these things rigorously and continuously, they're finding themselves at a much lower compliance level than they ever thought they were before. So there's an impact of the ability to do it more often because it takes too much effort, like we talked about. There must be a better way. Do you see this resonating with the customers out there, John?
Yeah, I do actually, and they say exactly what you're talking about. When they really look at it, they see this dip where it's a point in time compliance because it's so hard that people are working towards that. Then they meet the requirements, and then everyone wants to avoid it until the very next one. And so that's where you see that dip and systems go out of compliance, or, we're constantly building new infrastructure within IT. And so you'll see that drop because new systems come online.
Right. And then we talk a little bit about why is that? Why is it so hard um, to have that balance and that ability for teams to work together, or speed and risk, like we talked about, is still being that balance where you want to move faster, but you can't. Um, that balancing act problem kind of gets exacerbated by the fact that there are different teams working on this. There are different points of view. There are definitely different tools that they're using to try to accomplish the same task of securing and making your systems compliant. And this also applies for PCI compliance, and we'll get into the details there a little bit later. But for instance, a compliance team or compliance officer is likely to have a big set of requirements, regulations, or check boxes that they need to make sure that your systems are being matched up against and that we're following. Then we can go to the security team, and they might have, say, some security scanning tools or other validation tools that they're trying to make sure things are validated and are matching those desired states. And then you have the DevOps team that may be actually trying to fix the problems that are found and maybe using a whole nother set of tools. So the problem is that since there are all these teams with different tools to evaluate parallel things or similar things, there is necessarily a translation that's going to happen between those. And the compliance regulations will need to be translated into security scans, and the output of those security scans will need to be translated into resolutions or adjustments and corrections to the system. So ultimately, there's a lot of manual handoff between these teams. And a lot of time is wasted just doing that rudimentary basic code kind of discovery and mapping and making sure that things are understood by different teams and by different sets of systems. So it's extremely important, in our opinion, for everyone in the organization to have this ability to understand what it means to have a secure compliance posture, so that you can sort of have a single source of truth for all of those teams to make sure that they're clearly working in the same problem in the same direction. And the beauty of all this is that once that you have that common language, that common set of tools being used by everyone, security and compliance are things that can be codified and automated and have a level of scalability that is unprecedented. It's just an incredible amount of efficiency that you can once you're creating that compliance as code, which will then solve those peaks and valley issues that we just saw previously. Which
I would also
go ahead.
I would also add to that, Alan, predictable, right? And so the DevOps guys, the people that are coding, rather than guessing or wondering what they're going to be hit with, they can when they look at it as code, they can know what those security or the compliance issues that they need to address before it even touches security or compliance. They can build that right into their code because they already know what's going to be expected.
Yeah, I was going to say that you can check for compliance at any point in time or on any system. You could do it on a development system, you could do it on a pre-prod system or full prod system, be it at a hard machine, a data center, on-prem, or even cloud instances too. So it allows you that versatility and capability to validate compliance in any estate.
Yeah.
So we also talk about compliance as code, and it's very important to because it is something that is ubiquitous. It's that common language we talked about. It is the single source of truth. It works across. It allows a level of scalability, which then through code you're able to not just use a subpopulation, but have a broader comprehensive approach of your entire estate. And like I mentioned before, you can test it at any stage of your development life cycle. So you're able to shift your security testing left. And because you're able to do it more often at a scalable level, you're able to have a level of visibility, of scalability that will truly bring you what we like to call a continuous compliance state. Any thoughts there? And what does that wall of code on the right-hand side really mean, John?
Yeah, there's some incredibly powerful nuances in the code that you have here. And we'll look at real examples of this, but not only can you write the titles and a description of why this control is important, you can tag it with, in this example here, PCI related tags or HIPAA and others, NIST. And we see in the government space, we see a lot of them with their own internal government tags. And this allows you to approach your controls and your auditing almost like you would from a quality assurance perspective, where you want to run this test once and know which, let's say, PCI compliance requirements it fulfills. You don't want to run it for every single, 25 times to meet the same requirement, but in different areas. You want to run it once and know that you're meeting, let's just say, requirement 1, 2, and 3. And that's where tags come in. And you can pull these and get this information out of the system, bring it into your own, and really leverage it within the broader your broader environment. And you can also have references, and you can see that there with URLs. And it really ties this information together. Think of things like, not necessarily seen here, but like CVEs, where those are published and they're a number. And if you just know what is being impacted by that CVE, you can go and remediate those issues. And so this tagging plays a much larger scope when you really get into how do you scale this at a large enterprise.
And that this becomes the single source of truth, the single source tool for the different teams that we talked about, right? Compliance will have the tagging that they need to make sure that they're following all of the particular requirements that they want. Security will have the scanning capabilities to validate that those compliance requirements are being met in the various systems. And DevOps teams will have the code to make sure that it is tested and then have the ability to remediate, like John mentioned. So I think that's important. And we'll show some examples and have specific comments there. But it's only through code that we believe that organizations will have the ability to produce what we talk about in terms of continuous compliance at scale. And that model really applies for the Chef Compliance product. This is our, circle of life of Chef Compliance, where we see that our customers are able to acquire information. They access the trusted content that is CIS or DISA STIG certified, that aligns with those industry benchmarks for audit and or for remediation. It's certified through those governing bodies. And with what we call remediation content now recently, organizations can ensure that the remediation actions align directly on a one-to-one to the audit results that they're checking. So they're checking for something, and if it's not there, there is a remediation counteraction that can occur. Once you acquire that content, you can actually modify it as well by you can help define that compliance baseline that you want. It can be 100% to the PCI-DSS CIS certified content, and or you can also modify it to meet any customer specific requirements that you may have. The organization then can have the flexibility to use compliance waivers also that allow individual controls that, in order to avoid these false positives or misconfigurations, it will continue and move on without hindrance, without slowing down. And once that baseline is defined, you're able to test it and detect or continuously monitor actually and evaluate the compliance posture that you defined by detecting the deviations from that intended state. That at any point in the software development lifecycle, you can have that detection run and confirm or not. And if there's a not situation, you can remediate that non-compliance with the capabilities that we're providing that addresses those individual controls, like I mentioned, in alignment with the audit tests, essentially encoding those fixes to enable this continuous compliance model. Remediation can be applied very easily without requiring deep coding skills as well. So don't be taken aback by where we're talking about code, compliance as code, because there are remediation elements and there are programming tools that allow you to be very efficient from the get-go, straight out of the box. And ultimately, you're trying to maintain this comprehensive view and up-to-date view across your heterogeneous estate. So the reporting aspect is very important. You can easily view difference between the baseline and the remediated states and track the waiver status to enable you to, a fast and accurate audit at any time. So the audits that took 2 months to do could take down to days, really, and have a much broader coverage and than simply the subsets or of your population that you're trying to address. Do you see this resonating, John?
Yeah, absolutely. This really addresses the life cycle of that compliance. And the fact that it's continuous is incredibly powerful, so that, like you mentioned in a few slides ago, where you don't have these dips, right? New systems come online, and as we'll talk about in a bit, systems are not compliant right out of the box. So unless you have a hardened image, and that's a whole different effort, um, which we can also help with. But in this case, that continuous piece really smooths that out. So you're not point in time compliant, you're continually compliant.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. And then in terms of the flavors that we have, Chef Compliance kind of is built upon Chef's core technologies, with Chef Inspect being the validation tool, Chef Automate being the observability tool. Habitat is helping with the bundling and management of those components, and the core Chef Premium content. So there's an audit only kind of capability that is essentially designed for InfoSec and SecOps teams who wish to maintain just the complete visibility over the compliance status of their estate. It provides extensive audit content, like I said, made based on the CIS, the Center for Internet Security, and DISA Security Technologies Implementation Guides, or STIGs, standards that can be easily tuned, like as I mentioned, to meet each organization's specific needs. But if you're wanting to be more comprehensive and advanced, you have the capability of adding the remediation content on top of that, where you are able to have the INO, or the infrastructure and operations team, to really work to help close that loop between audit and remediation. And it really allows for this continuous compliance in your entire enterprise estate. This new functionality and trusted content makes it easier to remediate the issues uncovered during the audits without writing deep wads of code. There's a question, John, that I think you may be able to answer here. Will we be able to use Chef Compliance with, say, HI Trust, or able to just use CIS and STIGs? I think the content we provide is CIS and STIGs certified, but
Correct.
are we able to modify it to fulfill other industry standard, such as
Absolutely.
PCI-DSS? Mm-hmm.
Yep, absolutely. You can take our content and you can inherit the content and then modify it so that you're not rewriting it, which we would want to avoid, because you want to maintain that core data set. But you can inherit and then apply additional content or additional custom requirements to those systems for the compliance that you're driving towards.
So we do a lot of the heavy lifting up front so that you don't have to, but you could start
Right.
from a blank sheet.
Yep.
and
Absolutely.
and build the compliant to whatever compliance state you desire.
Yeah, you can use it as a framework. And what you'll see is these systems don't necessarily have to be managed directly by Chef. You could have another system manage them, let's say from a configuration management perspective, or whatever your environment requires, and then use Chef to do the compliance auditing against those systems.
But to use the remediation content, then you would have to use a Chef tool set to have that remediation comprehensive ability, right? So, but that's a great point, John, that you don't have to have Chef to manage your systems, but you can then just use the audit capability as well. So, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we recognize that there isn't a universal environment, right? There are all sorts of um, interesting one-offs or even interesting ways that customers have to install and deploy their environments. And we're not here to hinder that. We want to come alongside and help you audit those environments given your specific requirements.
Great point. So we believe that it's through this continuous compliance as code approach is where you're able to have compliance automation, is to scan early and often in your software development lifecycle. So instead of performing, like we talked about, that compliance security scan at the end, you're able to use it throughout the process and review right before has the ability to test that continuously and move from one stage to the next. It could be where you're having a comprehensive view, and it ultimately eliminates that rework and that wasted time that often happens with the old approach, and allows everyone to really everyone from development to QA to operations and even security to be on the same page with the same language and the same tool set. You've seen in many of the slides, Gartner has a compliance as code piece that they've published. We actually have a link to it later on that I'll share with you, that you can download the piece if you'd like, to where they agree in heart and in principle with us that DevOps teams need to implement this compliance as code by extending their automation and infrastructure as code to run those tests, those validations against environments to ensure a comprehensive compliance state. So it's only through code, it's only through compliance as code that you're able to have this continuous compliance approach. Why don't we dive a little deeper into PCI compliance? Hopefully all of you know this, but for those that don't, we're just going to level set some base information. So PCI-DSS was actually founded by the major credit card companies, American Express, Discover, MasterCard, Visa, and others. They created the Payment Card Industry Security Standards Council, which incorporated the PCI data security standards, which is what PCI-DSS stands for, to really set technical and operational requirements to protect cardholders' data. And it applies to all entities that either store, process, or transmit cardholder data. So it could be a bank, it could be a retail outlet, it could be a restaurant, and so on, or processing as well. The PCI-DSS standards is now at 3.2.1, which was released in May of 2018, is the latest and greatest version for PCI DSS. That deals with actually the payment card data and card holder information, which includes the primary account number, credit card data, card numbers, any sensitive authentication data, such as CVVs and so on. Each payment card company, however, may have its own program for compliance and validation levels and enforcement. So the ability to modify your requirements or compliance testing is impacted there as well. PCI-DSS consists basically of 12 overarching requirements. It includes the installation and maintenance of a firewall configuration to protect cardholder data. I think we have an example of that one running with John. Another requirement is to not have vendor supplied defaults for system passwords and other security parameters. So you can validate that with Chef compliance information. You need to protect the stored cardholder data, encrypt the transmission, protect all systems against malware, develop and maintain secure systems and applications, and so on and so forth. we are able to help actually with 10 of those systems. There are only 2 that we're unable to help you with because they really don't have anything to do with IT system configuration or compliance. One has to do with physical security access, and the other one has to do with policy definition for or InfoSec policy for personnel not being, those elements are not applicable in these cases. So if there aren't any questions about the PCI DSS, I'll hand it off to John, to the best part of the show now for the show and tell.
Right.
Take it away.
Great. So what you're looking at here is our Automate dashboard. And this is the visual representation of our infrastructure, of our enterprise stack. And what I'm clicking right here is we're looking right at compliance. That's what we're talking about today. And the way we approach these controls, we group them in what we call profiles. And we have a significant number of profiles out of the box. You can see here 454. That's gone up, goodness, in the last, I think there's 10 to 15 new controls a month, it seems like, since I was just even over the last couple months. And you can see that we've got profiles for all sorts of systems, a large portion based on those CIS controls, which what you'll see here in a minute is I used as a base for the PCI DSS compliance. And so it goes through, right, AIX and Amazon instances. We have even Apple and Windows, of course, Red Hat, CentOS, Ubuntu, an extensive list, and with subtle nuances between what those systems might be. For example, a domain controller versus a regular Windows server, and some of the differences in users and systems that we see. And so this is the some of the newest is the premium content that you can get. And what we would do is we would say, hey, we need to download this profile to the system. One, we don't want to overload the system with 454 profiles when you only need 2. And in this case, what I've done is I've just downloaded the Red Hat 8 level 1 server profile that has, I believe, about 190 controls, quite a bit. And then what I did is I pulled out the ones that I wanted to use for specifically PCI DSS. And we'll click this here as soon as it refreshes. And in these controls, what you're going to see is the actual code that it is using to test to verify that this either passes or fails. In the case of the firewall package, pretty standard one, you see there's 4 different total tests that happen. And not only this, but we also identify what's that criticality. In this, we say it's critical. In here, I've added those tags that we talked about earlier, where you can see that this meets these 3 PCI DSS requirements. I've also added a milestone. Well, what's a milestone? We know that from project management, of course. But what I've found in the PCI DSS body is that they have a priority tool where not only do they have all of the requirements for PCI DSS, but they've also prioritized those, and they do that by milestone. So I believe there's 6 different milestones in total. And here, this one is milestone 2. So you can now take that once you've run these profiles against your system, you can see where you at in that project life cycle, which is also a critical component if you're really trying to bring an entire environment up to a certain standard. So here we've got the firewall. There's some other ones that I've just cherry picked out from the broader body. We do have a white paper that addresses this in much more extensive process and shows you again the code. Again, that is the code that is being run is right here, the control. Now we do have a domain specific language. So rather than having to write very extensive regular expressions, for example, to do some of these matches, we do that for you and allow you to just simply write some very clear code that not only a DevOps person or a coder is going to say, oh yeah, that's completely straightforward. A security person could look at this and say, oh, I understand what xccdf_org and this really long word is, and I see that you're doing the controls that I'm looking for. The auditor can come in here and say, okay, I understand that description, you're meeting these requirements, and then they can know that you're actually looking at it from an auditing perspective and addressing their concerns. So from this profile, I apply it to a few systems that I built out in the environment. Now you'll see 4 nodes here. 2 of them I ran. They're not supported by Chef as far as infrastructure, so they're not managed by Chef. They were just some systems I built, and as long as our system has access, it can run these profiles against those servers or workstations or what have you. And here, of course, out of the box, they are not compliant. Now, some have 4 failed, some have 7 failed. Again, like I mentioned earlier, this just shows out of the box, unless you have hardened images, which even those should be audited periodically, they're not compliant out of the box. They run even some of the most straightforward, they don't meet on some of the controls and the compliance items that we're looking for. So we have failure. Now, we do have premium content that you can set up to auto remediate these. Although this is incredibly powerful, that takes additional work to make sure it doesn't impact your individual systems. So you can, at scale, once you've vetted these in your environment, you can bring a system online, you can run these queries or these compliance automatically, actually, and then remediate those if it's managed by Chef. And we see this a lot in our customers to get to the scale that they want to. And again, remove that pain from the environment of auditing and make this a non-issue. So at the end of the day, when the auditors come in, let's say every quarter or every 6 months or every 3 years, in some cases, you can hand them the documentation that says, here's all our systems. We're not just sampling, we're actually showing you that all our systems are compliant based on these controls. This is incredibly powerful. So let's look briefly at what does it look like when it fails and when it's successful. Because we did look at what looks familiar now here, these controls that we looked at earlier, but you're going to see an added component. And what you see here is the results. So on this system where this actually passed this particular control, here's the results. Yes, Firewall D is installed. Yes, the NF tables are installed. And the next one actually is, are they enabled? Because it's not just good enough to install them, they need to be enabled as well. And again, you can go back to the source, right? And look at what those controls are, tying this all together. Let's look at one that is failed, for example. In this one in particular, ensure SSH access is limited. And you've got a very long description here, which satisfies many auditors to see that you are putting, you know what you're doing here, right? Or at least we're providing that content and telling you why it's critical. And here's what I mentioned earlier about not having to write extensive regular expressions, for example, or much deeper code. We take care of that for you with our domain specific language, or DSL. And you can see here that as a result, it failed. And here's what it was expected, and all of this code, right? A security person could go through this and say, oh, yes, we need to take care of this. We need to address that, as well as a DevOps person or someone writing the software. And again, you can go back to the source, but that result really allows you to address the issue if you're doing it on your own, either through cookbooks or other capabilities within Chef, or our premium content where we remediate that for you. Okay, so we've looked at the successful result, we've looked at a failed result, and again, these are all compiled in the in a dashboard. I did want to address one more item, and that is actually two. We'll do two. The waived nodes, right? In many environments, I come from a high volume manufacturing environment where you have tools that are millions and millions of dollars, and maybe even run, we call it WIP, billions of dollars worth of WIP through that tool. If that tool goes down for any reason, that's a massive impact to your manufacturing environment. So we understand that. They still need to be audited, but we want to be able to call out that, hey, we're waiving this one particular control in this profile, because if we were to implement that, either it's not supported or it will take down that tool and costing a company potentially significant amounts of money. So waived controls are very, very important in that environment, for example, and I'm sure in yours as well. And you can set these to a scheduled time, because you know that upper management and the security folks are going to ask you, okay, we understand it's waived today. How long is that waiver in place now that it's been approved? And they're going to want to look at that on a periodic basis. And so you can set up the waiver, but you can also schedule it, and you can set a time frame and be much more detailed on why that waiver is in place, which again goes back to those security folks and the auditors for that example, for that matter. Also, you can skip nodes, right? There might be some that just need to be skipped for whatever your business case is. And so we allow that, or we enable that capability if that meets your requirements as well. So we have scan jobs. These are, you can set these up periodically. These are the ones that, for example, are not managed by us. So if you have another software compliance system or other implemented software, which most IT does, then we can still audit them and put them in these as a scheduled task and run those compliance audits. But we can also, for example, we have some managed nodes here. That's what I'm showing in this Chef Infra Client status. So we've got a few nodes. And in this case, we could auto remediate them, but they are fully managed, and they run, every 30 minutes to an hour, it's going to run this compliance code, or longer. In fact, we have some customers in some really sensitive environments that run these compliance every 5 minutes. It's pretty crazy at the scale that they run these compliance scans for. Alan, any questions or anything else that I may have not touched on that you'd like me to show everyone?
Yeah, you closed out with the important aspect that we've been trying to drive home, is the scalability of it, right? And the ease of use, because it's a very friendly tool. Once you learn the nuances of the language, you're able to have a very powerful tool in your hands that can check for systems that you have under Chef management or not under Chef management. So you don't have to be tied in exclusively to Chef. If there's any questions from the field, please make sure to enter them in either in the QA tab or in the chat. We'll also take a look at that. Um, I think we have enough coverage there, and I think we're coming up on
Great.
time. So before we end, I want to take over here and show you a couple of slides. Um, and as questions come in, um, there's one element that I wanted to talk to you about. Haventech is I used Chef to speed up their deployment times globally while delivering PCI DSS compliance. We allowed Haventech to deliver these solutions to customers, to their customers that prevent fraud and protected data privacy. The challenge they were facing was that Haventech needed to be able to deploy its payment tokenization and PCI solution anywhere in the world in a matter of minutes while maintaining comprehensive PCI DSS compliance. They wanted to automate the infrastructure provisioning for Docker environments, which quickly wanted to do it quickly and consistently by creating a template of sorts and automating the cloud formation scripts. They needed to manage the deployment and configuration of VMs and continuously configure and manage the applications deployed inside them. So the solution they found was to use Chef to provide them a system-wide automation, visibility, and control to maintain a simple architecture that is ultimately secure by design, fully automated, self-healing, and self-configuring. Essentially, Haventech is now able to fully automate its virtual VPCs, and I learned this term as I was studying this case, but the virtual private cloud infrastructure and the applications while maintaining compliant state. They used agent-based architecture to eliminate any kind of direct access to the production servers and applications while reducing PCI related vulnerabilities, including access and key management, leading them to essentially have an audit acceleration of sorts. They reduced deployments from days to minutes with actual zero data loss in over 5 years that they've used the solution. They created alerts that provided them flags, if anything, or if someone attempted to alter that configuration. They saw a rapid growth and scale of their customers and systems by consequence. There's an interesting quote there that really from the CEO of Haventech and how we help them, reduce or expedite their ability to create the VPCs. In closing, I wanted to make sure that you have 3 thoughts that are left with you, and this the ability to have security and compliance requirements as code is a capability, is a reality. It's not pie in the sky. This compliance as code approach is a delivery mechanism that can directly impact your ability to scale and the ability to really shift left into development your security aspects and controls, but more importantly, shift it right into production. So once it's released, you're also able to check and validate that those things are continuously maintained in compliance. And as Gartner says, compliance automation is essentially vital as it removes manual execution steps and minimizes potential human error and enhance consistency, traceability, and auditability. So I'll leave you with a few thoughts. Here are some of the next steps, some ideas on where we think you could do some research, maybe get some follow-up. So there's the webinar recording. We'll be using the same link that we have used for your registration. There is a PCI compliance white paper that we'll share with you as a thank you for attending this webinar. You can actually have more information on Haventech, even an in-depth interview with the CEO with that page. You can have There's actually a PCI-DSS Compliance webpage dedicated to explaining some of these solutions in more detail. And ultimately, I think you need to look out for ChefConf 2021. It's going to be an online version. It's going to be from September 7th through the 9th. We actually have a call for papers that is still up and running. We need you to submit, if you have a story, a reimagined use of DevSecOps tools. If you're building new systems or addressing interesting stories that you want to tell, new concepts or technologies that you're using, we're here to want to learn and hear more from you. It's a sessionized information, and there's a link in the chat for that. But also look out for ChefConf information. There's chef.io, ChefConf, a link for you to register today for the upcoming comprehensive session. We'll have a lot on compliance, but also on desktop and other chef solutions. Any closing thoughts? I don't see any questions coming in. John, do you have any parting thoughts?
I wish I would have been involved with this type of software when I was in IT, because I think you would see a much different culture towards some of these very difficult, time-consuming requirements that have come up over the past 15 years or so. And, I'm really excited to be able to show that to everyone. And I hope you take the time to go up to our site or out to our site and download, if you don't already have it, and take a look at what it can do for you.
And reach out to us, to me and John, via
Absolutely.
the social networks that we're out there and about. If you have any questions, make sure to share the recording of this webinar with your colleagues, so that you can get hopefully a automated PCI compliance tool set in your toolkit soon. So without any much further ado, Raisa, do you have any closing remarks?
Sure. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, John. We hope that you guys found value in all the information that was presented today. So if you like what you saw, we encourage you to share the presentation with your colleagues, teammates, your network. Also, the on-demand version will be available in a day or two, and we will email you as soon as it's out. You will be able to access it using the same audience link that you're using now. So with that, thanks again for attending and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, John. Bye, Alan. Have a good day.
Take care. Thanks.